Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of the verb, and today we are going to be dealing with tenses. Okay, so part 2. Tenses. Okay, so when we're talking about tenses, what we really mean is when something happened. Okay, so tenses means when something happened. Okay, so in other words, did it happen? Did it happen now? Did it happen in the past? Did it happen? Will it happen in the future? All of these are very important when trying to describe action. Remember that subjects can't really tell time. Subjects are nouns are just words that are just going to be what they are unless we plug in an action word, which a verb is. So technically, without a verb and a noun, we have no sentence. Now, tenses are present, past, and future, like you've always known, but they're broken up into subsections. But to make this more of a better understanding, what we're going to do is we're going to create a table. Okay, so we're going to create a table where I'm going to provide you with tense and 2 categories. Okay, now these categories are progressive and simple. Okay, so I will explain what I mean in a minute by that. Simple, progressive. So when we're talking about simple, okay, simple pretty much means that something happens once. Okay, so something happening once. Okay, so when I'm saying I hit the ball, how many times did I hit that ball? I hit it once. Okay, this would be a simple version of a tense. Okay, or a simple category of a tense. If we're talking about the present tense, so in present tense only, statement of fact, statement of fact, or in this case, when we're talking about the simple present, we got ourselves the statement of fact, and at the same time, we're going to talk about something habitual or habit. So if I'm doing something on a regular basis, like for example, I will say every Wednesday I do my homework. Notice that do is a simple present. I'm not going to say every Wednesday I'm doing my homework. Every Wednesday I do my homework. Or after lunch we go home. Okay, very simple use of the present, but it describes a habit. A statement of fact is always used, so really awesome in essays. Use it in essays. It's a statement that will tell the reader that you're very serious about what you're writing. So we don't just say this point will show you, this point shows. Okay, if you're a big Calgary Flames fan, you're not going to say Calgary Flames will win the cup. Calgary Flames always win the cup when they do good. I just put in a simple present in there instead of a future to indicate that I'm very serious about, or that every time the Calgary Flames play well, they win, or in this case, they win the cup. So I'll show you this a little bit more as we go through the tables. So for example, we're going to start with, and I'll make a little division, we're going to start with the present tense, which of course is essentially, everybody knows, happening right now. And the definition of a present equals happening now or happens every time. Now, okay. Now I'll explain what this means in a little bit. Let's take a verb to read, okay? And I put this verb in an infinitive. And usually in a dictionary, you're going to find something that looks like that, INF. It tells you to read is an infinitive form of the verb, and infinitives, not so much a big deal in English, but definitely a huge deal in French, Italian, and every other language in the world that requires conjugations of the verb to change endings. So RE is going to conjugate differently in French, like ER verbs are going to conjugate differently. IR verbs are going to conjugate differently. So remember that in other languages, if you're going to be learning a language, you need to know the form of the infinitive so you can drop the ending or the RE or the IR and then plug in the subsequent endings for every single person and number. And we dealt with that in part 1 of the verb. Now, the present tense happening now, or happens every time now, and I chose to read. So let's do first person singular and third person singular. The reason why I want to do that is I want to show you how the third person singular behaves, because in the English language, the third person singular is typically where you're going to find a conjugation of a given verb. Okay, so let's try this. Let's try the simple. Simple is always going to give us something that happens now. So if I say I read, statement of fact, that is a present simple. I read. I read now, or I read every day for weeks. Okay? Notice how when I say I read every day for weeks, it's a habit. But if I say I read, that is a statement of fact. Somebody asks you, can you read? Yes, I read. That is a statement of fact. It makes you sure of what you mean. All right. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys what a progressive is. So a progressive is very simply something happening continuously. So let's say, for example, I catch you guys sitting in the classroom with a book, and I ask you, what are you doing? The answer that you're going to give me is going to be in the present, which means it's not going to be I read, because technically, I mean, although I do see that you're reading, you need to provide me with what's called the progressive, okay? And a progressive is going to tell me something that is happening now, continuously, which means I am reading. Okay, there you go. I read, I'm reading, same tense, except one being the simple statement of fact, the other one is happening now. In the third person, she reads. And now pay attention to what's happening with this particular verb, as the S at the end is added, conjoined, right? That's what we call a conjunction, conjoined with read, and now we have a completely different form, but still simple. In this case, she is reading. So in this case, when we're changing to the progressive, the only thing that changes is the auxiliary verb. And again, in a present progressive tense, you are going to notice, and actually a lot of tenses, progressive tenses, you're going to notice the auxiliary verb. Auxiliary from the Latin word auxilia, meaning help. It's a helping verb. Okay, it's not the main verb. The main verb of my sentence, of this construction here, is reading. But because I plug in the auxiliary verb, it's the only one that changes form when we go from first person to third person. Okay? Okay, now that we've known the present, let's talk about the past. Okay, so we know the past tense, and you guys have been dealing with the past tense for quite a while now. When it comes to the past tense, and this is pretty true of quite a lot of things that we, that you guys dealt with, whether you're in grade 7, grade 8, or grade 9, or even further, grade 10 or 11, you'll know that when it comes to the past tense, you've only recognized it as the past. Okay, but the past in the English language, and actually in all other languages too, you'll notice that there is a way of expressing the past. So something that didn't just happen once in the past. What if it happened multiple times in the past? What if something happened in the past before something else happened in the past? And finally, when did something start in the past and when did something end in the past? All of these are expressions that are very, very important. We call these things sequence of tenses. Okay, sequence of tenses is what happens first, what happens second, what happens third. You guys love adding these adverbs, then this happened and that happened. To avoid it, we simply have to understand how different tenses are broken up. Before I get to the past, maybe you're wondering, why is the present not broken up in this way? Well, pretty simple. The present is happening right now, and you can physically see whether it's happening progressively or whether it's happening just once. Okay, so the three different past tenses. There are three categories, or three different types of tenses. We got the imperfect, the perfect, and the pluperfect. The definition for each is the imperfect happens sometime in the past, once or continuously. In other words, if you're going to use the imperfect, then you need to understand how or when this happened. So, for example, if I can't tell exactly when it happened, and it happened sometime in the past, I'm dealing with an imperfect. Okay? If I'm dealing with a perfect, it happened just now or a moment ago. Okay, so in other words, a perfect tells us, that's why we call it a perfect. The perfect tells us that something happened now, right now. Okay, and the only way to do it is to use the imperfect. Or for example, that you've been doing something in the past up until this very, very, very moment. Okay, means that we are dealing with a perfect. A pluperfect is something that happened. It had happened before something else happened in the past. Okay, so it tells us a sequence of tenses exactly what it is. What you got to remember about the perfect and imperfect, the imperfect will have the auxiliary verb has or have, and the pluperfect will have the auxiliary verb had. Okay? Right, so we got, as long as you remember, perfect, has or have, done something, auxiliary verb, had or had done something. Okay, very, very important to remember this when you're dealing with pluperfects, because a lot of times people just don't really pay attention to these types of things. And when we're talking about the sequence of tenses, everybody will always do the same thing over and over again. And that is what? That is, they are going to continuously focus on just the imperfect. Okay, and in reality, it really does mess up a little bit your ability to successfully express what you mean. Okay, so here we go. An example of the imperfect. I read. Now you see, the spelling of the past is exactly the same as the spelling in the present. There's the ambiguity in English. Why English is technically very, very simple as a language, because of the fact that we can sometimes get two words that are spelled the same but can have different meaning. What can tell you the difference between the imperfect and the present? Context, okay? I read now versus yesterday I read, okay? And she read. So in the imperfect, both forms stay the same. In the progressive, I was reading, and notice that now we have was as opposed to am, and he was reading. So the only thing that really changes in the imperfect, when we're conjugating the verb, is the auxiliary was. The perfect, I have read the book. She has read the book. Notice the have and the has. All right, just as I said in the above there. And then the progressive, I have been reading. She has been reading. Okay, notice that this has been is the key to the progressive tense. And what really brings all of these together is the fact that we have the ing across the board. Okay? So as long as you guys are able to really understand the form of auxiliary verbs and why they do what they do, you will be perfectly safe with conjugating your verb accordingly. Okay, let's try the next piece, which is the pluperfect. Pluperfect has the had, so I had read. And the pluperfect, she had read. And the same thing, I had been reading. And she had been reading. Okay. So notice the had and the had and the had been and the had been. So these are our past tenses. The last tense that you guys understand is, or should at least understand, is our perfect tense. Okay, the future tense, which essentially talks about what will happen in the future. And yes, when we're talking about this, what we mean is we have two different types of futures. One, the one that you guys know, is known as a simple future. Okay, I think everybody here recognizes when we're discussing the future tense that something will happen in some time, but also something can happen in the future before something else will happen in the future. Okay, or for example, something will happen in the future just as something else happens. I'll explain in a minute what I mean. But when we're talking about that, let's put a different category here. This is future tenses. And we have the simple future, or the regular future, which is something will happen. And it uses the auxiliary will. Or shall, if you like the kind of the old sounding English type of thing. And then we have the future perfect, which is something will happen before something else will happen. In other words, what if I want to say something like, as soon as I finish my homework, we will go to the movies. Okay? What you're doing when you're saying that as soon as I will is you are indicating a future perfect. I will, or I have finished this, now I'm going to finish this. Right? Which is pretty interesting if you guys think about it, right? Because at the end of the day, sequence of tenses are there to help you express yourself in sequence. Okay, I could say I will do my homework and then we will go to the movies, but notice how much more I have to add to that. So let's look at this future simple, so just a regular future. I will read, and she will read. Again, the auxiliary will. And pay attention as well to the importance of having an expressed subject in English, because nothing else except for my subject changes here. And then I will be reading. And she will be reading. In this case, we have will and be put together. Will and be put together. Future perfect is I will have read. You notice it has that really almost a past feeling, right? I will have read. She will have read. So an example here, if I keep going, I will have gone 2 kilometers. Okay, so in other words, if I keep going in the future, I will have reached something before I finish. Okay, in other words, something happening before something else happens. So you want to use this every time you want to express something that will happen or will have happened in the past if another condition is met. Okay, so once again, we're going to add this. So something that will happen if another condition. So in other words, if I keep saving my money, I will have bought myself a car. Or if I continue to spend, I will have gone bankrupt by the time I'm 5. Okay. Once again, this is when you're talking about meaning conditions. And future perfect, still the same type of deal with the ing. I will have been reading. She will have been reading. There you go. And of course, 3 different verbs to help us out to get to that. And that's it. We have the present tense, which is just the present by itself. We have the 3 forms of the past tense, the imperfect, the perfect, and the pluperfect, and the 2 future tenses, the future simple and the future perfect right there. So these are tenses. These are the sequence of tenses. I will make sure that you guys get a hold of this at the end, before at the end of the school year. It'll be available on the Google Classroom link. For those who are watching on YouTube, please record this, and you can replicate this this handout that I've just made to kind of help you gauge and go along with the lessons. So the next part of the verb will come in our next lesson, and in that lesson we are going to be dealing with the difference between something called indicative verbs and subjunctive verbs, which are dependent on tenses as well. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Take care, guys, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.